welcome back to the Engineered Life podcast. This is a show about the future of construction without all the buzzwords. Instead, we have honest, human, and practical conversations about what's working, what's not, and what we might still be trying to figure out. So in each episode, we sit down with someone who has a unique superpower that they're using to make the industry better. And today I'm really excited because I get to be joined by a good friend of mine, Hayes Heimbaugh. We worked together a long time ago. We worked together for a long time. And now we're back together again. Hayes is a strategic solution engineer here at Procore and has the superpower of making things super simple, even when they appear to be complex. Welcome, Hayes.
Awesome, AJ. Thank you, and appreciate you sharing your platform with me. That's quite the superpower you assigned me. I appreciate it. I hope to kind of live up to that, but also just grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with you again. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Likewise, it's so fun to be back together. And we normally like to focus in just on the unique superpower, but one of my favorite things about solutions engineers is their ability to be more than one thing at a time. So Hayes can make things super simple, but he's also very relatable. He can tell stories based on the situation he's in. He has more than one power. And so what we decided to do is have a little fun this week. We're coming off the heels of a big new superhero movie release. And so Hayes and I are going to take a step back and maybe just debate a little bit about what are some of the best superpowers in the comic universe, who are some of the best superheroes, and then ask some questions underneath it all, like how does that relate to construction? How does that relate to leadership and the job site in general? So let's dive into that, Hayes. And before we get into any of the superheroes, maybe let's talk about some of the big powers first. If you could choose only one of these superpowers, and I have a list here, but if you could choose only one superpower, which would you take? Flight, strength, invisibility, teleportation, speed, mind reading, healing, or the one that's most relevant right now, precognition, the spidey sense.
Yeah, I love that we're on the heels of a big opening weekend for Spider-Man. I don't know if you caught the stats on it, but I was watching Bloomberg this morning, and it was the largest opening for a comic movie since Endgame in 2019. So a nice little
Right.
stat there, since we like stats here, I think, in engineering land. But as far as the superpowers, it's a tough debate, right? A lot of facets to them, and I think contextually they're all really strong candidates. Personally, I'm going to lean towards healing. You know, I've always liked the Wolverine sort of character, that chaotic neutral guy that just powers through. And I think a lot of that comes from his ability to just persevere and have that resilience that is, sourced from his healing. So I'd have to lean there, but contextually any of these could have a lot of play.
Yeah, it's pretty tough when you think about them. I lean toward teleportation just because of the amount of time that I have to spend in a car some days. But at the same time, it'd be great to have any one of these. So maybe let's look at it a different way. Those are the ones that we personally want. But what about what's the coolest? When you look at that list, which of those powers tends to get the most pizzazz?
Oh gosh, I think flight is always aspirationally the one that gets the most pub, right? Probably catches the most headlines. Some of these other ones maybe fly under the radar, and I'm glad you pulled up teleportation, because that was the one I was going between with healing. The value of time versus the value of our wellness are both things that are really, I think, culturally top of mind right now, and so it's a tough hair to split. But yeah, I got to go with flight being the coolest. Super strength is certainly up there, but typically the folks who have one have both.
What I find interesting is, and we actually didn't list it as one of the possible superpowers, but the one that tends to be the flashiest, in my opinion, is the power that both Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne have: money. Just
Yeah,
all
sure.
this money and time, right? They really don't have any superpower. They're intelligent. They're incredibly intelligent humans, but otherwise, it's just about what they have the resources to create, right?
Yeah, that is an interesting and I think contextual answer, especially in a capitalistic society, right? They might be our idealistic state of what you can do when you have unlimited resources and capacity to deliver on innovation. If you take a society first view, right, versus maybe a more of an individualistic type approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. If so, we talked about like what's cool and flashy. What's we kind of said what we liked or what would be most useful to us, like the healing and the teleportation. What about the power that tends to cause like the most chaos? Like, what's one of those superpowers that always seems to go wrong?
Oh gosh, I think of Nightcrawler and his teleportation at times. That's a little chaotic. Mind reading, I think, has the most potential to cause challenges, but
Mm,
it could be used for the most good or the most, I guess, ill if you wanted. Spidey sense is kind of interesting, right? That one is more of like a passive thing. So I don't know. I think I think it's going to be one of these ones that you can deploy more intentionally.
yeah, that's fair. And I mean, we're looking at all these powers individually, right? But when you think of a lot of these heroes, they tend to have a collection of these powers, right? They're not just one. Like Spider Man, for example, has the precognition and strength and some speed as just a couple of his powers. You know, you look at someone like Superman, flight, and strength and laser beams and it just goes on, right? So I have a more of a philosophical question for you. When it comes to the collection of powers, right, do the powers make the hero cool, or does the person wielding the powers make the powers cool?
That's a really good question, and actually one I'm pretty excited to answer because I think it's a mix of both, and that's a non-answer, right? But I'll give you a couple examples on both ends of the spectrum, and they're personal, right? As I think comic book hero fandom largely is, but for me personally, Thor was kind of just always a guy who was there, never really that exciting, but the way they cast him and portrayed him in recent movies, he's a pretty cool character, right?
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and that's one I would think of where I was like, he's okay. He's just kind of like Superman, but he's from a different time frame or whatever, right? So like I'll give you the Thor example on the end of one that is a cool person on paper, but it really took them bringing him to life, I think, in cinema for me to like him. And then on the other end of the spectrum, right? And this is kind of some preamble to what'll come later in the conversation, I think, in modern casting, Cyclops is largely a non-factor, nondescript guy,
Yeah.
right? And you don't really think of him as being that awesome. In fact, I don't even know that it was very clear that he's the leader, of the X-Men in the movies that have come out recently. And so I do think that largely casting and who plays these parts, at least as it comes to our modern perception of them, is largely impactful.
Yeah, that argument could be made for like the entirety of the Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Like, talk about a bunch of random people that you knew nothing about, but the way that they put together the cast, like, just incredible how
Yeah.
that landed. And then, vice versa, to your point, the early Thor, the early Captain America, they kind of landed a little soft before they really got going with the character in some of the later movies.
Yeah, there's some build up there. And I know you've got some other questions we'll get into. Like Spider-Man casting has largely been important too.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Good point.
like, no offense to our guy Tobey Maguire, but I think he's good in other movies, but he wasn't my favorite Spider-Man, right? And on the flip side, Chris Evans has really nailed, I think, the core of Captain America, right? So
Yep.
at least we see that play out, I think, time and time again.
We've actually had that debate ongoing in the family household, who's the best Spider-Man. And I agree. I think they all have their moments, and they all have like different feels for different generations, but it's hard to beat Tom Holland. Okay, so we've kind of level set on the powers. Let's get into like the meat here. Who's the coolest superhero in the cinematic universe for the comics?
It's a tough one, AJ. I caught this in the pre-read, and where I want to answer is discordant with like who my favorite superhero is. So I'll lead into it with that, right? Who I think the coolest superhero is actually not the one I would tell you is like my favorite. And so after
Interesting.
a lot of thought, it's actually Deadpool. And I don't think it's
Ah,
close. Um, they did Deadpool really well in what was it? Well, Wolverine Origins, where he literally had every power, and that's when I was going through our earlier questions. That's what actually got me thinking about. I was like, man, they gave him like the Wolverine things, but with katanas and all, and Cyclops' eyes. And so, if you really think about it, like in that movie, he was the ultimate superhero. And then the Ryan Reynolds portrayal of him and the ability to just own that character has been excellent.
okay, so that begs the question then, because you talk about just the total collection of powers, but then you also talk about how Ryan Reynolds portrays him. Like, are we judging these superheroes as cool based on them at their most powerful, or based on them at like their most human or their most culturally relevance? Like the Deadpool today is so relevant in the culture.
I
Where
think
how do we judge cool?
Yeah, good question. I think that's the crux of this debate in this arena too, right? Because like if I really want to defend my favorite character, it'd be Batman, and I'd die on that hill. But like in terms of coolness, I think it's more the human factor, the relatability, and then you also got to boil it out into just like the raw power, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that is a component in a vacuum of what makes a superhero cool or not is their ability to just overcome and power through and persevere, right? That's what we look towards them for inspiration. I think largely that was like his Stan Lee's kind of impetus for generating comics and writing comics back in the day, and so what brings me back to like a Batman is the human factor, and I think even more to kind of put a bow on your point, more modernly, Ryan Reynolds has brought a real nice human factor or relatability to Deadpool
Right.
for the right segment of people, right? But yeah, so I think that to me, the human factor is probably the biggest weight there.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about different kinds of heroes, different kinds of powers, and how they've been portrayed, both in the comics and the movies. If we were to take a project site, right? Let's go build the next data center, and we're going to staff the job with superheroes. Let's think of it as the construction Avengers, if you will, right? Who are you selecting for the roles on the job site? Now, I'll list a role, you tell me who, and we'll see if they make sense. So let's start with the project manager. Like, who's the lead on the job site?
Sure, the head guy, pragmatic, has to be cool under pressure, looking forward, clearing roadblocks. A largely a tactical person and strategic. I'm gonna go Cyclops here, and I know this might be a little bit of a curveball from the logical choice, but I've got a spot for him too. So we'll keep that there.
No, I like it, especially when you talk about like back to the Cyclops of the comics, right? Like he was cool under pressure. He was that leader. He did have the vision. Um and he didn't always have to be front and center, right? He wasn't flashy, which was is a great empowering move. Um okay, what about the scheduler or the planner on the job site? Who's keeping us on track?
Oh man. So in terms of planning and scheduling, I really think it's got to be Iron Man, and that might not be an obvious choice, but the reason I put him in that slot is when I was thinking about the original Iron Man movie, right? The way he became Iron Man was through just relentless and maniacal planning and plotting and strategic execution, right? To get himself out of the cave, to build himself into the suit, all these things. And so I think that largely he's going to be your long range planner. He's going to be a little too fixated on his end result, right? As schedulers can be, a little decoupled from the realities of building in the field, but that's okay because you need to have that aspirational plan sometimes that you're pulling towards.
Yeah, it's funny because I think back to that scene where he's trying to lay out the plan in Infinity War, and Star-Lord's like, "No, let me do the plan, and then it won't suck." Like, but I counterpoint for you on this one. Back to Spider-Man. How many times did Spider-Man save Iron Man with a plan, whether it be uh giant attacking Giant Man, right? Ant-Man with
Yeah.
the Empire Strikes Back, or the aliens reference in Infinity War. Like, it's pretty funny how often he came up with an idea, but Iron Man still did execute. All right.
Yeah, no,
Let's
that's a good counterpoint. Maybe he's getting credit for some things that are inferred versus actually executed.
yeah, the intern's helping him. Uh let's go out in the field. Superintendent, who's running execution in the field?
All right. So this to me is the heartbeat and the intersection of the entire project, right? And so while leadership and planning are certainly important, this is where the rubber meets the road and this is the absolute linchpin of project execution. So actually this is where I've got to put, I know a guy who's near and dear to your heart. This is where Cap goes to me. He's got the
Ah,
right
yes.
balance of, those leadership and those intangibles. I also really like that he is kind of that epitome of the American dream, right? He worked really hard for something. He got told no a lot, and he still was resilient, persevered, and ended up achieving what he wanted to. And that's what people look towards in these moments, in the pressure moments on site, is somebody who's gonna, hold the standard for them and make sure that everybody's rowing in the right direction. I think that's the guy there.
I love that. Good call out. Not gonna argue there. All right. Safety. Who's keeping us safe on the job site?
I think probably based on some of his lessons learned, Mr. Fantastic's a guy I would tap here.
Ooh.
He seems to have a track record where he might be pretty dialed into being proactive in his safety measures versus reactive at this point. So that's kind of my sleeper pick there. But I'd be curious to hear other options. Safety's a tough one.
Yeah. I like Mr. Fantastic. I Another group of comic book characters I rarely think of, the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
Um, I was leaning toward someone a little more popular in Bruce Banner
Oh, very
as
nice.
yeah, someone who's always trying to calm the situation and keep
Yeah.
everyone safe. He's constantly worried about it, but mainly that's because of his own chaos. So maybe that's not helpful. Um, but yeah, good call out with Mr. Fantastic. And again, leaning into some of the lesser knowns. All right. Who's our job site tech support? Like, we need a technology person, and you've already burned Iron Man. So who do we got?
Well, I think there's a little foreshadowing earlier, right, when we talked about who would even be available for this in terms of resources and capacity. And I think this is actually where I slot in Batman.
Ooh,
Iron Man is kind of, the guy who's going to Mars and building electrical cars, right? He's got his own agendas, and they tend to put out commercially viable products on top of it, which is nice. Whereas Batman, I think, deploys technology a little bit more purposefully and in a problem solving way. And so that's why I
mm,
chose him here relative to Iron Man. Not that they both don't have an arsenal of technology at their disposal. It's more about, I think, methodology and how they deploy it.
well, Batman's super simple, right? Does it come in black?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and yeah, there's that too. I like that aesthetic.
Yeah.
The
All
old
right.
black and
Last
yellow.
one. Let's go with crisis response.
Crisis response. So this is tough, but I'm actually going to pull from Batman's buddy here and go with Nightwing. He spent a lot of time as Robin. This might be a little bit of a deep take here before he got to graduate to the big leagues, but I think once he made that jump, he really was the consensus pick across the more modern superheroes for his breadth of of strategic deployment, right? And so when it comes to being able to navigate pressure in a short burst, I think you're going to look to somebody like that more often than not.
I love that call out. And I think you could lean into a lot of the sidekicks here, right? Like Rhodey could could be a good pick there. Falcon could be a big pick there. Yeah, the sidekick idea, like they basically kept the main superhero in check
Yeah.
every time, whether it be Robin or any of the like. So that's a good one. Okay, so with all that being said, when we talk about the comics, sometimes there are people that they feel like they'd be obvious to lead, right? Superman's an example. Feels like an obvious leader, but sometimes they aren't the right choice to lead, and they actually do more damage to the team. In a la Civil War, right? Like both leaders actually damaged the team. Who are some of the leaders that you see in the comics that maybe do more damage than they do good because of their lack of understanding of people?
Yeah, I think actually that's kind of the key of the issue, right? Is you find in the comic books that when our quote unquote heroes start to tilt towards the other side is when I think our egos become equivalent with our power, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the challenge that we've always got to balance, and this stuff's outside of the realm of superheroes too, but they're the manifestation of it. And so when you see the Tony Stark become, literally everything's working for him, right? He's tough to deal with, or and even at times, Batman or Superman, they get stuck in their mindsets or where their goal is, and they can't get moved off that. And so when you stop taking an open-minded and collaborative approach because you think you're always right or you've got the most powerful idea, that's when you stop being an effective leader.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, like who doesn't often get enough credit but always seems to be the glue on the back end?
It's always the unwilling leaders, right? Even Cap, as much as he wanted to be a soldier, didn't necessarily want to be the penultimate leader that he became. Cyclops, similarly, right? The folks who don't want the leadership mantle, but more so have it thrust upon them at the time, I think are typically your best leaders. The Star Lords of the world are like, no, I just want to go pursue my own agenda, but the goodness of my heart or my care for the result that's bigger than me or the people that I'm working with lead me in this other direction. And those are, not only the best aspirational leaders, but they're very inspirational as well.
Well, and I think of Black Widow often too, right? Like
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily want to be front and center, but always is there when you need her. So when it comes to building the best team, then does the best team have the strongest superheroes, or does it have like better glue? Like which one of those makes a team more effective, or is it a balance of both?
Well, that's an interesting question. In the context of superheroes, I think probably if you had a bunch of super powerful guys, that'd probably work out okay. But if we boil it down to the context of the real world, right, and the teams that you and I have been on, I can pretty confidently say it's the ones that have the tightest glue, right? The best interpersonal relationships, the ability to want to work and help solve problems outside of their own. And so that's what I always look to in team building is how can we find a way to get everybody working towards their strengths and then patching up on other areas too along the process.
Yeah, and I think we do ultimately see that at least in the Avengers saga play out, right? Where they at the end they put the egos aside, they get back together for the greater good. And it's funny, you made the comment earlier, right? Like I have a favorite, obviously, it's on the wall behind me. And I always come back to Captain America, and that's going to surprise nobody, but the reason that I've always loved Cap is because his best superpower, at least in my opinion, his best superpower is the fact that he just has a desire to do the right thing, a deep desire to do the right thing. And that's even what they say to him, right? In the first movie, no matter what happens, don't change who you are, a great man. And any one of us can have that superpower, right? Like it's not flight, it's not strength, it's not teleportation. It's something that we can do. We can tell the truth. We can protect other people. We can raise the concern that other people are avoiding, right? And choose the good over personal convenience. So that that begs the question, if that's something that every one of us can do, why does it always feel so rare?
Yeah, I think you ask a good question there, and a lot of it comes down to two things, right? On the front end, it's friction and not wanting to experience whatever friction you might need to get to, but from A to Z, right? And then the second part is ownership. I think a lot of people are really, really strong problem identifiers, but that's where they leave it. And it's really, especially as we boil this out to construction or engineering and the industry we serve, it's really on us to take ownership of the facets of the problem we can solve and ownership of the result and drive it towards that to the extent we can. And a lot of times that is cross-functionally collaborating, but bringing in other superheroes, even, our arch nemesis or somebody who we don't work well with, who has that other power that we might not. The scheduler, the general superintendent, the project manager to get these things done, and owning that final result, not just the problem identification.
It's funny because we like love to talk about our lessons learned, right? And it's always, this is what we would have done differently. Hindsight's 2020. We know it, we get it. But oftentimes, like in the moment, we're faced with the decision, and arguably we tend to know what the right decision is, but it's still difficult to choose. You mentioned the friction is one of the reasons, or it could be working with someone that we don't want to. And I don't think that people struggle because they don't know what's right. I think it's more along the lines of the fear. Is there still a stigma on the job site where the fear of consequences is more than we can bear when it comes to speaking up?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess if we think about consequences in the context of socially, that maybe there is, right? There's that cultural shift is a long time coming, and I think we're headed that direction. But there's still a component of, I guess, snitching, for lack of a better word, for people who do that. But at the end of the day, you're
Yeah.
saving people time, quality issues, right? I mean, I've ripped out walls and millions of other things, and I can tell you the most expensive and time consuming way to do something is to do it wrong the first time, so you get to do it three times. Um, and so,
Right.
I think it does come down to that social barrier of just not wanting to be the goat, but you got to lean into it and just embrace it.
Well, and I mean, we're talking about construction, right? It's one of those industries that depends on trust between two people or even multiple companies who have different contracting models, different incentives, different information, different levels of authority. And that's led us to be one of the most litigious industries out there, right? So, what do you think we can unlock on a project if we act more like teammates, even when it might be a little uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of efficiencies to be found. Of the most successful and fastest moving projects I've been on have been the most collaborative and the highest trust environments, where you can go into a room and you certainly might not always love what people are saying to you, but it stays in the room when you walk out, and it's all constructive and towards an end goal, right? You might have your MEP subs banging on the table and walking out of the room, but it's because they care. And those are the type of environments that are fun to build in because you get things done, 25% ahead of the schedule and ahead of cost and some things like that. The flip side of that is, the average project now is grossly over budget, over schedule, out
Mm,
of scope
hmm.
because nobody wants to ask the hard questions or answer the hard questions on the front end. And some of that is how we design contracts. I feel like we criminally undersell contract administration hours, but we're not having that conversation today when it comes to the front end planning and some of that. So yeah, the more you can get into those true integrated project delivery with high trust environments, the better off we're going to be.
Do you think we're at a point in the industry where they're ready to change the standard? Do you think we're at that inflection point, or we still have a little work to do yet?
Yeah, I think that's going to come down to two things. It's a good question. I think we're trending the right way with both, right? On the one end, we've got to have the the ability culturally to do that, and that's been the hardest headwind to do it. And then the other thing is collaboratively, we have to have the tools and the ecosystems to support these workflows and bring everybody closer together, um, to collaborate in one place, because that's where a lot of it lives in silos today. Is just everybody's spread out across their own work streams and operating within their own verticals, rather than taking a project centric approach. They're looking at it as kind of just the one little piece of their portfolio or one little blip on the radar.
Well, and when you think about it, right, like the job site is one of those true team atmospheres that still exists. And we all, well, not we all, but many of us played sports growing up, right? And a lot of us miss that team camaraderie that we had in sports. And the job site offers kind of that last real true team mentality. So we've talked about a lot through this episode, and we kind of came back because one of the things that I always like to remind people of is these superpowers that we tend to talk about on the engineered life is they're practical things that any one person can do, right? They're not flight, they're not invisibility, they're not something that takes an alien to make you a superhero. They're things that we can do. And so let's take a step back and let's look at this practically for a minute, right? How can, if I'm a listener listening today, I'm on my way to work, I'm getting ready to go out onto the job site, is there something I can do to pause long enough to recognize an opportunity on the job site to have that desire to do the right thing versus the easy thing?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge always, and you nailed the key, right? Is to pause and consider. What it always is boiled down to, most simply for me, and this isn't an original thought. I think you'll know as soon as you hear it where it came from, but it's something that has always been in the back of my head anytime I'm walking around a job site is see something, say something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has the authority to know something's wrong, coming full circle on our spidey sense, like your gut, there's some hard science there. If you see something that looks wrong or out of sorts, even if it means you might be embarrassed because you were wrong, it's better, you're more often better to stop the work or raise the issue, because if you're right, uh, you're saving yourself a compounding error, right? I can give you an example from my real world, just to kind of leave you with, right? I'm walking the job site on a large headquarters building at 5:30. The only guy on our jobs is our civil guy, and I'm holding the MEP contracts. And they've got a big, I think it was a 935. They're doing some, selective excavation around the foundation, and they just slide down in and stick the bucket on a corner of the foundation. And so now he's like spinning out trying to get out. I'm like, why don't you
Mm.
guys just stop before you tear out a wall on accident? And we'll call the superintendent. We'll figure it out. And we took 2 hours, and they mobilized another cat out, and they pulled it out. But it very easily could have been $100,000 worth of concrete or more that we were replacing, had you let that proceed. But it wasn't my scope. I could have easily been like, nope, not my problem. I'll let the structural guys deal with it. Maybe tomorrow when it becomes a bigger issue, right? It's 5:30. I can go home to my family, but just take the 5 minutes. It's worth your time. And don't be afraid to be wrong, because those are the right kind of mistakes to be making.
Yeah, I love that. That's a perfect place to end on, because the amount of times that I've heard someone say, "Not my problem, not my monkeys," like that, it's the exact opposite, right? It's just see something, say something, making a difference. It starts with you, and that's a perfect place to end it, because you don't really need super strength, you don't need unlimited resources, and you don't even need a title, right? Like, you weren't even the right guy in the right role. You just need the courage to act responsibly, and a little bit of that unwavering desire to do what's right. So, well, thank you, Hayes, so much for the time. This was awesome. I love getting to work with you, and it's been great to reconnect. Plus, this message is pretty powerful, even though it started out all in fun. So thank you for that.
Yeah, AJ, I really appreciate you sharing your platform. I know we've been kicking around, this debate for a while, so it's nice to get it out in the ether, and hopefully the comments are kind to us.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. In that vein, if this conversation resonated with you, hopefully you can find one tip from all of this that's applicable for your job site. And if you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to subscribe, share, rate it, review it, whatever it might be. Because remember, construction's cool, and we should all go tell our friends. Thanks a lot, Hayes.
Thanks, AJ.